Thank you so much to panel one for a riveting discussion. My name is Sandra Khalil. I'm the Associate Director of All Tech is Human. I have the honor of moderating panel number two. I'm gonna sit back. I have the honor of moderating panel number two, Generative AI, Understanding Its Risks and Rewards in Online Spaces. Joining me today is a stellar panel of subject matter experts in this space. We've got Emily Harman, a trust and safety advisor and attorney. We've got John-Orr Hanna, an online safety expert with a robust background in child safety and
pouring water.
and pouring water. And we've got Mark Bentley, a digital safeguarding advisor. So thank you so much for joining me today, everyone. Mark, I'm gonna start with you. In our prep call, you made a really interesting point that I wanted to set the scene with. You said that generative AI is democratizing rapidly without the corresponding safety guardrails, and you've mentioned that history is essentially repeating itself. So are we fundamentally failing to learn from our past technology rollouts? Like, take me through what you meant by that.
Yes.
Okay.
This will be a very short panel.
Good. So I've been working with schools for the last 11 years, and part of my role is overseeing filtering and monitoring within schools. So we're seeing a lot what young people are getting up to in schools on devices when perhaps they should or they shouldn't, and things they're trying to do and failing, but also through monitoring what they're doing on devices, sometimes at home that they've forgotten is a school device being monitored. And what I meant with the democratization is a year or so ago, we would hear in the media that there's a big new defying app, and that would be the big news story. And a few months later, there was another one. But since the new year, I would say 2025 has radically changed that. We're seeing hundreds or even thousands of new, really tiny Gen AI sites. And whereas still, the talk is still a lot about what's Meta doing, what's ChatGPT doing, and so on. Whatever criticism there might be of them, they have guardrails, and you can see if you go on for some loose testing, it will try and redirect you. But it is now possible to, for someone in their bedroom to sign up to a Gen AI API and set up their own site, and they have no safety controls. Often they are overtly sexual or adult in one of many ways. So yes, I think we are repeating the mistakes of the past when you think of, social media, but the App Store or App Stores, and not having age verification on that sort of thing. We went for years of thinking, maybe we should have done that first, and it feels like the same issues are repeating of we're just letting it go, looking at it, thinking, oh yeah, there's some things there maybe we should be doing. Yes.
It's hard to put the genie back in the bottle.
Probably more than hard, yeah.
Yeah, it's, Emily, you bring a really interesting regulatory perspective on this, and we're seeing these develop, especially in the US with the moratorium. How do we look at a company's need to keep innovating in this space with the equal need for these safety measures to be baked in by design?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that those two aims are combative or kind of mutually exclusive. I think that they can work arm in arm to achieve company and wider trust and safety aims. Platforms obviously need new products and features to be successful and to gain in popularity, but they won't gain in popularity if they can't be used safely. I also think that we can't allow innovation without, if it is kind of at its core an unsafe innovation. So this is quite an extreme example, but I won't obviously name company names, but I did some kind of gap analysis and red teaming on a companion AI app, so a kind of girlfriend companion app. And I don't know, how much people know about these apps, but you can generally create quite detailed kind of AI composites of companions to interact with. Obviously there's an adult slant to a lot of these companion apps as well. Not always, but there can be. And you can create these down to the specific personality type and also body type. And on this particular app, there was, if you're creating a female companion, there were options to create kind of different breast size. So you'd have small, medium, large breasts, but they also had an option to create flat-chested. Now, if you already have a small-breasted AI companion, you've got to think about, why is there a need to create completely flat-chested companion, and the obvious kind of nefarious purposes that could be used for, and is that particular innovation or product feature on the app really that necessary to lead to successful use of that of that service? So that would be an example where I'd say you don't need that innovation. It is kind of largely unsafe and you're not gaining anything, and it's not harming the company to remove that particular feature.
That's an excellent point. And I know, John-Orr, you've worked across multiple of these harm domains. You've worked in misinformation, extremism, child protection issues. What new threat vectors are emerging with generative AI that you'd want to put on the table today? And, how do these differ from the past challenges that you've worked on in those domains? Are there threat actors that are getting more sophisticated, or is there a playbook that they are, adopting from?
Yeah, so I think the kind of Gen AI promise is sort of kind of around productivity and creativity, and that's great, and it provides all these positive aspects around society in lots of different dimensions. Lots of people now with kind of relatively low technology experience or creative experience can start and with a very low friction level, create this amazingly rich, dynamic image, piece of music, voice cloning, song, poem. All of those creative aspects around productivity equally translate into sort of a bad actor space, where you can start in the space of either generating more content, generating more interactions, or generating brand new content that hasn't been seen before, be it in mis and disinformation or be it in other spaces such as CSAM. Those are sort of in the, if you like, in the content space, so i.e. kind of the sort of end product area. Equally though, all of the, for want of a better term, all of the bad actor infrastructure that is required around that. So to be able to create accounts to exist on different platforms at different times, to be able to manage large amounts of data, to be able to build compelling and engaging narratives, avatars, to create fake profiles that will seek out and engage minors and other vulnerable people. All of those tools and capabilities, which would have before, taken significant amounts of investment over prolonged periods of time with large groups of people, can now be effectively achieved with an individual and probably about a weekend with some of the brilliant, and quite advanced generative AI models. We see it in cybersecurity, we see it in lots of other areas. When you needed 6 or 8 different people with different skills in forums discussing how to be effective in a particular type of criminality or illegal activity, that is now one person and a chat bot and 20 to 40 hours. So that comes with lots of brilliant aspects around it. So we think about in the trust and safety space and the ability to identify behaviours and those things as well. But we should also be really clear about the scale and ability that it provides in the bad actor space. So the ability to be much more capable. The other piece I would talk about is sort of public and private Gen AI models. Obviously, where you have a central model where you can put some controls around that, and you can have aspects where it's owned by a particular company, an entity, or it's governed in some way, so somebody else can see what you're requesting it to do, can track that behavior, and can do things, to kind of mitigate or identify possibly unhelpful activities. The other aspect of that is where you're able to build and run your own local Gen AI model, where there's nobody else overseeing your activities, what you're doing, and that is, we're into $300 or $400 in the US to buy a card and kind of run it. So having that local, what may be termed as an open source model, and that's up for a bit of discussion around the word of open source there. But that model, is again where there is absolutely no oversight of a particular individual and their activity at scale. So yeah, those would be sort of the spaces that we see, and I guess the uptake is massive. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Mark, did you want to add to that?
Oh, well, apathy, I think, is also a good threat actor. It's not not classically known as one, but kind of apathy on the one side, and also the sense of being overwhelmed by the scale of it. We see that in education, but also families and parents when they don't understand it, and we've seen this for over years with apps, for example, but it's just getting to the point where we're trying to teach critical thinking, but we don't get it either. And that scale that John-Orr was talking about, I looked at a single Gen AI website this morning that was actually a collection of tools, and I counted, or I did the multiplication of the grid, and there were 914 that I saw this morning of AI tools, and just kind of whizzing through, every one of them looked inappropriate. So yeah, just that scale multiplies whatever the threat vectors are as well.
Sure. And just to stay on the child safety aspect of things, Emily, you made a really good point about the societal shifts and perception with deepfakes and synthetic content. You've noted that young people are increasingly viewing the sharing of AI-generated content, explicit content, as less harmful than real images because they are fake. What does this desensitization mean for the future of risk perception, especially among children?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I suppose anecdotally, I've kind of noticed that minimization and desensitization in kind of three different aspects of my background work-wise. So the first one is my background as a criminal defense attorney, representing individuals charged with indecent images of children, what we term now as CSAM, and repeatedly having the same kind of minimization of offending behavior of it's just online, I'm not hurting anyone. In schools, where I go into schools to teach online safety workshops, there is increasingly a lack of understanding of Gen AI CSAM, a lot of humour in the classroom around kind of deep fakes of fellow pupils, and then where we also see, I suppose, a minimization is also in the laws. So really there isn't, you can't blame kind of young people, and to an extent people that also online offenders, for minimizing that behavior kind of in contrast to contact offences, because oftentimes the legal frameworks do also minimize synthetic media and kind of online offending compared to to kind of contact offences. And we are seeing kind of laws try and combat that, but it is kind of increasingly an afterthought. Like even with some of the more robust measures within the Online Safety Act, we're having to kind of gap fill with subsequent legislation like the Data Use and Access Bill. There are amendments being made to the Crime and Policing Bill to try and ensure that we are criminalising, deepfakes and synthetic CSAM sufficiently, and treating, for example, synthetic, non-consensual, intimate adult images as seriously as non-synthetic media, and making sure that those images are illegal. So there is, I suppose, I'm not sure if I talked around your question or answered it, but there is an increasing, I suppose, appetite to meet some of the needs to kind of gap fill legislation and kind of seriousness of response to like synthetic media and Gen AI CSAM and NCII.
Mm-hmm. And I know, Mark, you've had extensive experience as well in the classrooms and have probably seen similar apathy, like you mentioned earlier. In your experience in the schools especially, how are they adapting the safeguarding practices to account for the AI-generated threats and taking them seriously, especially when the lines between real and synthetic content and the harm is so blurred, as Emily is sharing? And what are other experiences with similar vulnerable populations aside from?
So I think schools are always lagging behind, and that's not through their own fault, but because they will see things before others do, and they also have to walk an unfair tightrope. Years ago, when, for example, WhatsApp, the age was slightly different. Actually, it doesn't really matter, or any app. Schools have to walk that tightrope of we're not supposed to endorse children on being on apps of any sort or games underage, but at the same time we've got to deal with the problems. If we deal with the problems too overtly, parents will complain, why are you encouraging my child to be on that app? Even parents of the children that are actually on it. So there's that sort of conflict. The fact that guidance can be somewhat divided as well. So the DfE's actually been really good at bringing out some Gen AI guidance, but as more comes out, it does seem a little bit confused. Are schools being asked to go full steam ahead with Gen AI, or are they being asked to be really careful? Or if they're doing both, then how on earth can they do that? Obviously, a school is a busy place, but I think the main struggle is that adults need to learn first, and we are, as adults, as society, are so far behind. How on earth are we teaching our children and young people to cope with something that we can't cope with? So have we, we still struggle with getting the text message, hey mum, I've lost my phone, this is my new number, can you, that sort of thing is still going, and adults are still falling for it. We're still thinking about fake news of 15 years ago of a newspaper title headline being wrong. We're struggling with that, and then all of a sudden we've got Gen AI sexual abuse videos. The quality of that is going up so that people can't recognise the difference. I think that is really where schools are at. They're doing their best, but it's a great challenge, and I think that's why we are finally getting to a place of what we've needed for a long time, of legislation and regulation combining with education, schools and parents, as well as industry movement. So finally, it seems like some of these pieces are coming together. But yeah, it's not an easy place for schools to be dealing with in busy, full curriculums and short budgets and all the other things.
On top of the things they're mandated.
Plus teaching and learning.
Yeah. I want to go to you, John-Orr, on this, because the public education and awareness is super important, and it serves the purpose of protecting us from Gen AI harms. But you made an interesting point on the call about accidentally equipping bad actors with a playbook in that sense. So could you share more about that?
Yeah, I think we're on the Gen AI pieces. We're right at the start of this sort of hype curve. So fantastic interest in the tools, products, activities, fantastic interest in any story that's associated with Gen AI, particularly around, people, it's a sensationalized, interesting period as part of the start of this sort of technology discovery, that hype curve bit that I sort of spoke about. Some of the challenges we're seeing in the space, though, and I guess talk to some of the reporters in the room, etc., is that when we see examples of court cases, particularly in CSAM examples and indeed in other highly violative criminal cases, what we're seeing examples of is where in the story about the offender at sentencing, etc., either the senior police officer, chief constable, senior reporter has listed out every single technology that offender used and the context with which they used it, none of which is necessary to convey the seriousness or impact of the particular incident or set of incidents. And there's there's a couple of prolific examples, I think, where individuals were creating either CSAM or as well deepfake adult content as a service, and they set out the entire suite of tools and technologies that individual was using as part of the court hearing. I think in those scenarios, I would really seek to challenge the need to report at that level of detail, because I don't see a societal upside to that. Rather, I see, unfortunately, educating and upskilling a wide range of people who may have had a curious interest in the technology but now have enough of an understanding to be able to go in and investigate a capability or indeed start to replicate things that they have seen, or unfortunately create new versions of or enhanced versions of what historically individuals have been convicted of. That in turn then creates, we talked about skills, I'd probably talk about, people I've worked with in law enforcement, creating this continual and evolving, challenging environment that law enforcement's trying to keep pace with, because unfortunately our future offender population is being inadvertently educated from actually, ironically, some of the court conviction cases. So I do think when you look at the guidance for national reporters, be it in sort of news, etc., there is guidance around suicide and self-harm, particularly in suicide areas and what should and shouldn't be reported. I think we have a gap, not just in the UK, but more broadly, where there isn't strong enough guidance on what elements we should report around technically facilitated crimes, and actually how that should be reported going forward beyond the day in court. So yeah, I mean, that would be an area where I think we could very quickly, hopefully, limit additional risk that is created by overzealous reporting is probably how I might describe it. Yeah.
I want to stay with you on that, especially the law enforcement response piece, because we're now seeing that generative AI is allowing the threat actors to offend at scale, and synthetic content can further complicate law enforcement's ability to even distinguish who a real victim is. And so walk us through those changes that you view as critical to the investigative approaches.
Yeah, I mean, law enforcement, I don't think anybody in law enforcement would disagree with me, but to be clear, I'm not speaking for them. But if you'd have said 5 years ago our online challenges are massive, nobody would have disagreed with you in the UK, US, across Europe. I worked with most people around, Australia. This is all before Gen AI, obviously, so that's just times the 100. The challenges now, I guess, are similar and different. So we talked about productivity, so we just have sheer scale, which is a problem. I think if we look at areas in particular around child safety where we have synthetic CSAM content, so this is generated, getting close to it being, quite difficult to discern between real and synthetic. And now on top of that, you now have a burden on law enforcement or any other investigator to say, is this a real child? Does this real child exist somewhere, and should I be dedicating resources to that? And what about the next person? Is the next person a real child? So the ability to be very effective at scale and delineating between synthetic CSAM and originated CSAM. Now there may be elements that there is child elements in those two aspects, and that challenge is becoming grayer and grayer. But where we're able to provide tools and techniques that can start to identify synthetic material at scale, we see examples of that in mis and disinformation and other synthetic environments. Whether there's collaboration across those two domains that allow us to very quickly and early make decisions about whether there is a real world victim, and whether we should prioritize that against the sheer volume of other content. I think that is, and again, law enforcement is working very hard in the space, and this is yet another challenge for them in that. There are some excellent initiatives around C2PA and some of the other spaces to be able to identify synthetic material in other news areas, but actually, this is still a challenge for law enforcement.
Emily, as the regulatory frameworks are taking shape here in the UK, you have the Online Safety Act, there are others. How do you view them adequately accounting for Gen AI specific risks, including provenance, authenticity, detection, reporting? How is that looking right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's behind. Part of that is kind of symptomatic of how fast generative AI is kind of racing ahead. It's very similar to to what John-Orr laid out in terms of law enforcement struggling to keep up with the cadence of the kind of creativity of online offenders using Gen AI to create CSAM and non-consensual adult images. And like I said earlier, we're seeing a need for kind of backfilling legislation because generative AI hasn't been factored into kind of online offences in statutory frameworks like the OSA sufficiently. So you need further legislation to make sure that, for example, deepfakes are adequately criminalised. And we're seeing that even the Cybercrime Convention, obviously it's broad and it's it needs to be broad and supportive enough to allow for almost 200 UN member states, but it doesn't explicitly deal with generative AI, CSAM and NCII. In terms of how you interpret it, I think that there's wording along the lines of however visually depicted or something like that. So it will depend on how the UN, once the convention is ratified, decides to kind of interpret and enforce that. But again, we're seeing kind of non-explicit, explicit mentions in very important kind of legislative vehicles, not not focusing on generative AI.
Which is the flavor of the week that will ultimately change and evolve into something else. Mark, you touched on age verification. I want to go back to it. You highlighted how weak and absent age and identity verification can undermine harm prevention efforts, and what's needed to make these systems more meaningful, especially deepfake content, becomes more convincing to the untrained eye. Like, what do you see as needed there?
Yeah, I'm kind of obsessed with age verification and identity verification when it comes to online harms, particularly for children. I've yet to be convinced that there is a harm that would not be improved by knowing the age or the identity of the users involved in it. And on the other side, I remain to be convinced that there is any parental control or safety control that cannot be undermined by a lack of knowing the age or identity of the user. So I really think it's a linchpin to all, and I'd offer it as a challenge to all of you. Convince me of something where they're not really important, because it just changes everything. If I know there are people with privacy concerns on it, but there's been lots of work done. There's been international standards on age verification and identity as well, in terms of tokenizing it and removing it step by step, so there's less of a worry of data being leaked and things like that. But I really think that is going to be the change. I think it's excellent. It's about to come in for online pornography. I really hope that Ofcom and DCIT and whoever else will really power ahead with moving after that to social media and other areas as well. I think that will transform the space both for children and adults. It will set up different areas that will be safe for different people, different needs, different ages, demographics, and so on. But it will also be really powerful for small providers. Currently, small providers that say, here's an app, it's just for children, or it's just for this, they have to compete with big tech, where it's for everyone. And I really think that will help with that kind of spreading the load and really making things better, higher quality, and so on as well. And in the UK, with driving licenses being online by the end of the year, allegedly, and then Meta has worked with Yoti on Instagram, I know, and kind of proving that it works. I feel like I'm going off topic and can't remember what the question was, but I think all of that is important to say.
Absolutely.
Nonetheless. But in terms, you said something about how deepfake will affect it. I think that will come down to the amazing work that's being done by the different providers in that space. There is lots of kind of real life likeness work going on. So I know Julie from Yoti is here somewhere. £50 later, thank you, Julie. And there are loads of other great organisations doing that privately in Switzerland and loads of others. I can't really speak for them on what they're doing for it, but I know they're on the ball with that sort of thing.
Absolutely. I have one question to close it out that I'd love an answer from each panelist on. And, if you had the ear of a policymaker or a platform representative today, what's one urge or change that you'd convey to them? Anyone can go.
Well, I'll keep going because you can guess what my first one is. Age verification, identity verification, but I'll also add a cheeky third one. Doing more about lawful but awful content, because there's lots on illegal content, but there's so much that is not illegal that is ridiculously harmful for children and for adults. So it would be battering down the door on those three things with one label to keep you happy.
I'll maybe go next and try and follow that. Cognizant we're sitting in the Royal Society as well. In my previous roles, I have been incredibly frustrated with senior policy leaders and, on occasions, senior people on different platforms around the fact that keep being told that there's certain solutions that are too hard to solve. There's too much grey area and it's just impossible. We have brilliant trust and safety companies in the UK, be it Yoti that Mark has talked about, be it Resolver. These companies have built trust and safety solutions for over 20 years, some of them, solving all of these problems. So actually, it rarely comes down to a technology problem anymore, even though sometimes it's conveyed as a technology problem or a misunderstanding around technology. It's either a policy issue or a funding issue. It's not a technology issue. Might be where I might put my money.
Up the revolution.
Well, just that I just think it's clear as a technologist, as an engineer, that's my strong view about where we are with the vast majority of challenges that I see.
I'm going to say something legal as the lawyer on the panel. I would push for more criminalisation of harmful media. So in the same way as CSAM is criminalised, and therefore it makes it very easy to compel platforms to take it down, we need the same level of criminalisation to the media that involves non-consensual intimate images, extreme mis and disinformation, violent extremism, harassment, hate speech. All of the kind of visual depictions of those illegal harms need to be criminalised to enable ease of takedown requests to platforms to remove that media that a lot of people think should just be considered illegal media, but actually it isn't. So yeah, that would be my plea.
Completely aligned on all these pleas. I hope people are listening. So thank you so much, panel 2, and let's move on to the closing remarks. Thank you so much.